Hello, my name is Danielle Tucker, and this is my presentation for Animal Science 313, Exercise Physiology Online. I have researched the effects of studs in exercise for horses. Studs are similar to the human aspect of athletic cleats or spikes. Many horse owners use studs, which are placed in a horse shoes for competitions or any event in which the owner feels that they are necessary. The use of studs on performance horses decreases slip distance in both the hind and front limbs and changes the natural movement of the horse. In this presentation, the effects of studs used on the front legs versus the hind legs will be described by reviewing an experiment that targets the focus on slip distance. Effects of studs on horse slip distance, movement, and performance will be discussed in this presentation. For this research, I chose my primary article, which is a veterinary science study titled "The Effect of Lateral Heel Studs on the Kinematics of the Equine Digit While Cantering on Grass," to help me understand the main goals of studs. In this study, they used 9 different horses, all of which had been ridden by their usual rider, and they cantered on a grass surface on the same day to keep variables constant. Hoof markers, or in other words, white stickers, were placed on the hooves of the horse to allow the researchers to quantify the data by measuring the distance of the hoof that slipped on the grass by analyzing it through high-speed video analysis. So basically they took a camera and they were able to use the stickers that were the same distance apart and able to see that hoof and how much it slipped when it contacted the ground, when the horse had studs and when the horse did not have studs. The slip distance was measured in all 4 of the limbs. The top picture shows a horse's shoe, and he's actually screwing. I believe he's taking it out of the horseshoe. He may be putting it in, but that's just an example of what studs are, so you can get an image of that. After analyzing and graphing all of their data, they discovered that the effects of studs is not proportionate for any of the limbs. The front limbs slipped less than the trailing limbs, both with and without studs, as shown in this graph. You can see that the horse legs move in this picture at different time. In a canter, there are 3 beats, and the trailing front limb and the leading hind limb will hit the ground about the same time. However, each limb carries a different amount of weight, meaning that the force of the hoof hitting the ground will be different. This is why the slip distance is different in each foot, and studs will affect each one differently, affecting pressure on the limbs in various amounts. So that's why in the graph it's going to be unproportionate. A study conducted by researchers Sharp and Hopkins, who are experts on this topic at the Royal Veterinary College, have an article that's a study that's titled "The Effect of Hind Limb Studs on Movement Symmetry in Horses During Lunging." In this study, the researchers lunged a horse in both directions on a circle with and without the use of studs and measured the angles of the horse's hip and hind limbs during movement. Now in this picture you can see the horse's hips, and it's from the rear end, and it's just showing that the symmetry is off in the left side before and after adjustment. So basically if a horse looks like they have this angle, they may have some sort of symmetry that's off. And I will explain kind of what they studied and what they concluded from this data. This is a picture that they used. This is just a picture to show the method that they used when they lunged a horse on a circle. So there's a visual for that. Now here's what they found. So I wanted to go into the natural movement and discover if the studs affected this natural movement of the horse while it was cantering. So the head and symmetry was about the same and did not show significant difference. However, the pelvic movement changed in the right limb, which was considered a weaker limb for that horse. So moving that way was weaker. The researchers explained that there was an increase in limb angle and a lower peak vertical force with the inside limb when studs were used. So basically, to simplify it, a hip hike was created when using studs, when the horse circled in a clockwise direction. There's an article, "Lameness in Motion," written by Kevin Keegan, and he explains that hip hike, hip drop, and gluteal rise are terms frequently used to describe hind limb lameness. So my question is this possible that studs interfere with the natural movement at the point where it can create a temporary or permanent hind limb lameness? And the picture on the right is the multiple limb lameness situation. And I thought this picture was pretty interesting because there are many reasons a horse can go lame in their hind end. And there really hasn't been a lot of research done on this that maybe studs could be a cause of this. So what I did is I kind of looked more into the performance of the horse. And I was trying to discover if studs is going to affect the performance of the horse and if this is really causing hind limb lameness. So I went further into the performance and I questioned if there's evidence. Now, from this research, we can conclude that studs aid in performance of the horse during competition. We know that it does because it decreases their slip distance, but at the same time, the studs are going to create a tendon and ligament pressure when the horse is moving because of the increased traction the stud has with the ground because it's decreasing that distance. During performance, the terrain will also matter. For a cross-country ride, for example, in this picture, a horse is jumping down a bank and the conditions seem to be dry since the dust is in the air and the footing looks decent, so this horse may not need studs, but in many cases riders will use studs because they are concerned that the terrain that cross-country holds is much more uneven and could be sloppy and wet sometimes, and that horse is going to need more grip in more extreme cases. But in disciplines, as shown in this dressage picture, the ground is flat and this horse is barefoot, and this rider may decide that this horse doesn't need shoes, they don't need studs, so maybe this horse is sure-footed, and you just have to kind of depend on the discipline to know if you want to use studs or not, and then the horse. It's all going to depend. So studs may affect the natural movement of many horses, but maybe not others. So it's going to depend on the horse you have, the discipline that you do, the terrain, and kind of what you're doing. So it's unfortunate that there's not a whole lot of evidence on this, and hopefully we can do some more research on this further in the future since the equine industry has really been rising in popularity. So for my conclusion, unfortunately, studs depend on many factors. Horses that are barefoot can perform just fine if they are sure-footed, and they could be at a low risk for injury, but even a higher risk for injury if they slip, but maybe they're having less tendon and ligament pressure, so maybe they need that slip distance. Since we know that the traction is increased and slip distance is decreased with studs, we can conclude that a horse has a smaller chance of slipping, so they have a smaller chance of falling down. However, studs need to be used correctly and on the right surfaces. If used long term, they can possibly lead to a hip hike or signs of hind limb lameness. If used during performance, they can increase the grip of the horse's feet with the ground, but also increase the pressure on the horse's limbs, causing the natural movement of the horse to change. When using studs, know all about them first. This is an image I took off of the SmartPak, and they have an article that explains excuse me. They have an article that explains how to use them, when to use them, kind of different types that you can use, and it's very helpful. You can always do your research if you ever are going to think about using studs, if your horse needs studs, and it's very important to know how to use them and when to use them and when not to use them. They can be very dangerous if used improperly and at the same time very effective if used correctly. All horse owners should be educated on studs before using them for the safety of their horse and even themselves. And this is my works cited and the articles that I use for my research. Thank you very much.